So I'll just show you some photographs, and as I go through the photographs, I'll explain to you where they come from. Some of you may have seen them before, and in that case I apologize. But this is in many ways the main thing for me. The part of me talking to you from my own experience or my own knowledge is almost irrelevant. It's the thing I use in order to get your attention to the things that actually matter. Because while my experience is limited, the experience of these saints definitely isn't. And while the span of my life is quite small still, this tradition, the Celtic tradition, has gone on for a few centuries before it went extinct at the end of the first millennium. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about a few saints, not that many actually, about 5 or 6 of them. And as I present to you their lives, and very little details of their lives, I don't want again to bother you or to completely bore you, I will show you the places where they've lived. Because to me, that's much more important than reading about their lives from a book. I'm sure all of you know that, well, I hope all of you know this is what the United Kingdom looks like. And I wish I could move, but I can't. So you can see the Outer Hebrides to the west of Scotland, the northern side of the larger island. And it is in the Hebrides that most of the Celtic saints who came to Scotland from Ireland lived their lives and performed all their miracles. There are other archipelagos and islands around the United Kingdom, especially if you look to the north of Scotland, the Orkneys and the Shetlands. But most of the saints lived in the Hebrides, Inner Hebrides or Outer Hebrides. I'll spend just one more minute with this map. Because it is important to understand something relevant to our Orthodox tradition. It's important to understand that from the very first centuries, Christianity in England, do you see where London is? Christianity in England was brought from Rome. And although in the first millennium, really, there was no major difference between the two kinds of Christianity, it is important to underline that into England Christianity got from Rome, whereas into Ireland it arrived from Egypt, through the trading and the business that was made at the time between Egypt and the south of Ireland. And then it worked its way through Ireland, into the north of Ireland, and then to the islands. And from the islands into the other island, the island of Scotland. Okay. This is our island. It's called the island of Mull. And there are several important things here, but I will only point one to you now. We'll go back to this map several times. The red dot, which marks Kilninian, is where our church is located. Kilninian simply means Church of Ninian. Kil is the name, the word that gave the word church in English, or Kirk in German, and a series of other words. As you see, it is on the western side of the island, with nothing to protect it against the Atlantic. And what I'll do is I'll tell you 2 or 3 words about our main protectors, Saint Ninian and Saint Cuthbert, and then I'll show you 2 or 3 of the islands nearby the Isle of Mull, with photographs from where the saints lived. This is our church. This is Kilninian as it looks today after we've restored it. About 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago it did not look like this for many years, because that bell tower which you see at the end of the roof and the roof itself were taken down by a storm at the end of 2013. Simply the trees nearby were broken and they fell over the tree and over the church, and they just broke the spine of the church. And this is taken from just, standing in front of the church. I want you to see how close the ocean is to where we are. And it's that sort of trees that fell over the church in 2013. All right. The first saint, and I promise I will not spend more than 1 or 2 minutes per saint, to my shame, actually to your shame, because this is your boredom that limits it. I'm a very tough monk, so don't. The first saint is Saint Ninian. The important thing about Saint Ninian is that he is the one who founded the first monastery that we have documented in Scotland in 397. And I always try to put that into the context of the 4th century. That is the very century when in Ireland the first monasteries in the whole Christian tradition were being created. That is the century of all the major desert fathers. To me that was a major surprise, because I had always assumed that in the West things happened, with 1 or 2 or perhaps 3 centuries of a delay, but that wasn't the case. You will always see that I'm using these icons, which are icons created at the monastery, and in this case it's Saint Ninian dressed as a bishop but praying in a cave, because he was indeed a bishop, but his bishopric, his seat, was in a cave. At the very end of this beach, if you follow the line of the sea algae, seaweeds, at the very end there's a small dark dot. That is the entrance to his cave, and I think I have a close-up of it.
Wow.
There it is. The Catholic Church is still celebrating once a year in the cave, and by the grace of God I hope once we are established on Mull and I don't have to travel the world as I do now, we can do that as well. So we can pray to Saint Ninian. The second protector of the church itself is Saint Cuthbert. Saint Cuthbert was not a Scottish or an Irish saint. He is the greatest miracle worker of England, and he is by far the most beloved among the Celtic English saints. There are many, many wonderful stories about him, and we know a lot of details from his life because of Saint Bede the Venerable, who recorded a lot of detail. In this particular icon, and I think in the next one as well, he's represented into the North Sea at night, which is why the background is so dark, praying into the sea. He was once caught doing that by his abbot when he was still a young novice, and he explained that he can only pray when he faces death, the danger of death. Because when that doesn't happen, he is not praying, he is merely pretending to pray. And for some reason that spoke a lot to me. It was something that I fell in love with. And then of course you see his cell in the form of a beehive, igloo-like, represented in the icon. He was also a bishop, like Saint Ninian, but unlike Saint Ninian, he did not live in a cave. He lived first on Lindisfarne, a major monastery in the northeast of England. You may know the term Northumbria or Northumberland. Lindisfarne is the holy island in Northumbria. All that's left of it today are these beautiful but, rather lonely ruins. But after he's lived here, he moved to these islands, the Farne Islands, and he lived as a hermit until the day he died. Even after he was elected the bishop, he only functioned as the bishop for about 2 years and a half, and then he simply ran away and came back to his island. This is the actual island, the Farne Island where he lived. And you can see there's again a dark dot towards the middle of the island, which marks the place where his cell was. This is important, this sort of photograph, because it shows you the difference between high tide and low tide. And that's where that presence of death, the danger of death, came from. Because if you're not paying attention to the movements of the ocean, particularly in the dark of night, it would have been very, very easy to get drowned in there. The water currents are very dangerous as well. And this is the actual island. There's a very small church on the place where his cell used to be. The island is not inhabited today. It is a bird sanctuary island. And there's very little, if any, mention of St. Cuthbert as you go about to visit the island. you are allowed to spend about an hour and a half, I can't remember now, on the island on certain periods of the year. And within the church, which is open, so the birds have full access inside and they go in and out as they please. Within the church, I was blessed to be able to celebrate the Divine Liturgy. You may recognize my singer in the corner. She's doing a good job. That's why she's coming back. I wish I could, but I don't know how to do it. I shall learn one day. I wish I could include some sort of sound to this presentation, because it's a beautiful thing to hear the troparion to St. Cuthbert being sung during the Divine Liturgy on his island, centuries after that island has not been inhabited anymore. Okay, so those were the two saints to whom our church is dedicated, St. Cuthbert and St. Ninian. The actual monastery is dedicated to all the Celtic saints, because it is the first monastery in the Celtic Isles since basically the Vikings invaded. So I thought it would be profoundly unfair to pick and choose the ones I like. Let's just dedicate it to all of them, and if they want more monasteries, well, may they build them, because I've had enough. So the first one is St. Brendan. I begin with St. Brendan because he is actually the first one to found a monastery in the Hebrides. Most of us know about St. Columba and the island of Iona, but really St. Brendan arrived to the Hebrides about 20-something years before St. Columba. I'm going to stand out just to show you. I'll show you where the island is. Southeast, this is the archipelago. And within that archipelago, the most southernest of all the islands is where St. Brendan arrived. And we take pilgrimages, day pilgrimages there, and we see the typical beehive cells that you would see everywhere in Ireland, for instance. And this is precisely the same shape that the cells, the monastic cells in Egypt at the time had as well. Because obviously, the Egyptian monks, when they came to Ireland, they built what they knew how to build. Oh, thank you. And then from Ireland, when they were forced basically into Scotland, I'll tell you why a bit later, they continued to build what they knew. This is, how do you do that?
There's a button on the side near the top.
That is a church. What remains of it, the ruined church of St. Brendan's Monastery, it actually dates to the first millennium, what is left of it. It no longer has the roof, but we can celebrate the Divine Liturgy in it, and we have done so several times. The complex of the ruins is much larger, with the church there, what I've shown you before, and then you have several other monastic buildings, but these date from a later period, the Benedictine period, like 14th, 15th centuries, prior to the Reformation. Center here, in the foreground, is the original grave of St. Columba's mother. When St. Columba built his monastery on Iona, that monastery was for men. So when his mother reposed, he buried her body on St. Brendan's Island, not on Iona. And these are the double beehives that we know almost 100% sure that belonged and were the beehives used by St. Brendan himself, because they are dated to the 6th century when he was there, and because it's a double beehive, only the priest or the abbot of the monastery would have a double beehive. He needed one for his own use, either this one or the other one. And then the second one would be used to, advise the brethren and hear confessions and things like that. And you can see there's a door in between them, connecting them. And we do celebrate the Divine Liturgy here. The ocean is just here somewhere. I wonder, this is another view. 541, if I remember correctly. I'm rather bad with numbers, but I think it's 541 when they've dated the double beehive. And this is the photograph to show you how close, again, to the ocean, to the water they are. And this is us celebrating the Divine Liturgy. We have to carry everything on our backs, from a small chair, which then becomes the altar table, to everything else. And there are several dangers there. The greatest danger is the weather, because you can get there, you can give the blessing for the beginning of the Divine Liturgy, and then 5 years into the liturgy, a pouring rain comes out of nowhere. But by now I've learned my lesson, and everybody has an umbrella. So I ask the highest, the tallest man to be in the middle of the beehive, pretty much there somewhere, with his umbrella really high up, and then there's a layer of smaller people with umbrellas, and another layer, and another layer. So we basically complete the beehive. We simply complete the beehive, and we are safe, and we can celebrate. Another real danger are the midges. But because it's so close to the ocean, we are relatively safe. It's much worse to celebrate in the church, because the walls are high enough to block the wind. But these walls are very low, so the wind blows and keeps them away. And the third danger are the seagulls, who are extremely tempted by our prosperas. So you have to have someone whose job is to fight away the seagulls as they dive from the sky, because they might just run with your communion lamp, and then what do you do? I mean, are you Orthodox, dear seagull? I don't want to have that conversation with my bishop, so I'd rather just guard the gifts. All right, moving on. The second monk who came to the Isles and built a community there is St Columba, and he's the one everybody knows about. And the island of Iona is the one everybody goes to. It's known as the Holy Island of Scotland, the way Lindisfarne is the Holy Island of England. Is there anybody here, in all honesty, who doesn't know why St Columba left Ireland and went to the Hebrides? There was a Celtic tradition that said that when someone copied a manuscript and created basically a new manuscript, the resulting manuscript was the ownership of the man or the woman who owned the original. So even if you copied it, if the original belongs to me, the copy belongs to me as well, although it's your work. Well, St. Columba didn't quite like that copyright law, so he actually made a manuscript using an existing psalter and held on to it. And although that sounds impossible, in our world today, that led to a real battle among the monks and the people who supported them, and people were killed in that battle. And as a result, St. Columba was condemned by his own synod, and he was forced into exile. He could have stayed closer to Ireland, but because he felt such guilt for what had happened, he took it upon himself to keep sailing north from Ireland until he reaches an island from where he can no longer see his home country. He wanted to be a completely stranger wherever he would go. So they sailed and they sailed until they reached Iona, and in the icon, that's why he's represented painting a manuscript of a scripture, and he doesn't look particularly happy because he's contemplating the scene of his youth. And then they reached Iona, and this is the bay, which is known as St. Columba's Bay. It is the bay where St. Columba and 12 monastics who accompanied him arrived in 563. And there is a hill on this bay, that one, which is known as the Hill of the Turning Back to Ireland. It is the hill on which, by tradition, St. Columba climbed, looked back and made sure that his home country was no longer visible. And once he made sure that that happened and that he could repent on Iona, they settled there. And this is another group of another pilgrimage. I do my best not to use the word mad, but every time I see myself and these lovely people just celebrating in the weirdest places, in the weirdest environments, that's the one word that keeps coming back to me. And you've got Kuria Martha there, and then also Elizabeth is there, I don't know who's here. Is there someone from Monachi here? I think they've Brian is there as well with Libby. This is actually our first pilgrimage, and we are on the beach at St. Columba's Bay, and we simply positioned our icon there, and we blessed the waters, because we thought, well, if we bless the Atlantic, we are also kind of blessing America and blessing. We have very high opinions of our blessings. So eventually, on the island, the monastery of St. Columba was established. Of course, what you see today is the abbey, but most of the abbey actually dates back to the late 19th, early 20th century. But it is located where the original monastery was built. Because it's located in the same place, you can still see things like, for instance, this little monument here is known as Dan E. It is the highest point on Iona, and it is where the Druidic hermits who lived there prior to the Christians' arrivals, where they would be performing the human sacrifices. So the place is marked because it is historically important. But see how close to those pagan rituals he built his monastery. And this is the hill where St. Columba's cell was built. We know from his life, which was written very very soon after his death, we know that his cell was located on a hill, a small hill, overlooking the cells of the other monastics. And the local tradition kept this knowledge that that's where his cell was. But until the 80s, everybody made fun of these silly, Christians who hold on to their traditions. But in the 80s, they've done excavation works, and they have actually found the foundations of a beehive, just like the ones that we've seen on St. Brendan's Island. So sometimes holding on to tradition, even when there's no real, logical proof, pays off sooner or later. Also on Iona, there's another saint called Saint Orin. This is a very dear saint to me, simply based on experience, nothing to do with the story of his life or anything like that. But he is the one who I felt from the very beginning loves me and wants me there and fights for me to be there and actually succeed. Even before there's absolutely no reason, as I'm sure each of you have had this experience. Very often you feel that you're just chosen by one saint or another, and they just love you and they pray for you and they just do anything to help you go through your life, although you've done nothing, to even get to know them. St. Orin was the oldest among the 12 monks who came with St. Columba. And when St. Columba came, all he found were those pagan druids performing, human sacrifices and all sorts of other rituals. And one night, St. Columba had this vision of a local god, a demon, who told him very clearly that there's nothing that they can build on Iona, because only things that are blessed or founded, if you want, through human sacrifice are going to be able to be built on Iona. So of course St. Columba thought, well, that's the end of the story, because as Christians we don't do any sort of human sacrifice. But to his surprise and to our horror, we have the story of St. Orin, who was very old by then and who offered himself to be buried alive at the foundation of the Christian church. And he is buried, his relics were buried, and they built the first church, and that church still has his name. It's called St. Orin's Church. The cemetery around is called St. Orin's Cemetery to this day. And the church actually, in the icon, if you remember that shape, a very simple shape, is this church.
His relics are still there?
The relics, that's actually a question that relates to all these saints. When the Vikings invaded, all the relics and the treasuries that they had, the treasures that they had, such as the manuscript and so on, were either sent to Ireland, parts of them. Some of them were sent to Lindisfarne, because that was deemed more safe. It's on the other side of the island. And other parts were buried on Iona and are still to be discovered. But St. Orin is the first Christian buried in this Christian land. And his church, I'm convinced not by accident, is actually the only building on Iona that dates back to that first millennium. Everything else was taken down or rebuilt much closer to our times. And as you can see, everything was very close by. This is St. Orin's chapel with the cemetery, and this is where, the monastery was. And this is Mull. Don't laugh.
I looked up.
And inside St. Orin's, again, we celebrate. This was actually a very special celebration for me, because you can't see him, but you can see his hat behind that gentleman there. That is Archbishop Benjamin, the OCA bishop of San Francisco and Los Angeles. He came last summer with a whole pilgrimage, and we had such a wonderful and blessed time. And it was so special to get an Orthodox bishop as part of a liturgy in the Celtic Isles. I just enjoyed every moment of it. And as these things can show you, this church is also open, and the birds have free access to the church. The other thing that's important about Iona are the famous Celtic crosses. The one you see here is called St. Martin's Cross, and is in fact the only one of the original ones that is still standing. It was put up in the 8th century, and at the time when the Vikings started their invasions, there were 365 of such crosses all over Iona. They were using them the way we use calendar days. Every day a different saint, a different cross. Only St. Martin's survived both the Vikings and the Reformation. And in many ways, the Reformation was much worse than the Vikings. The other cross you see is called St. John's Cross, but it is actually a replica of the original. The original was destroyed and thrown in the waters around the island. They found the bits and pieces, and it's actually now in the museum, reconstructed, but this is a replica. The reason why they took them down at the Reformation is that these crosses were covered with iconography. This, if you can pay attention, is actually the Mother of God holding child with the two archangels here and there. There are lions on both sides, speaking of Christ's two natures and the perfection of those natures. This, for instance, is Saint Daniel being eaten by the lions. Somewhere there, here, is actually, and it's not particularly clear, but this is David playing the harp, and this is Saul listening to him. So all these crosses were covered with sculpted icons. So when the Reformation happened, because of that, they were taken down and just thrown in the ocean. And St. Martin's is the only one that survived. And this is the one I mentioned to you, St. John's, which was found in the waters nearby and just put together again. Thank you, Father. St. John's is important historically as well, because it is the first visual representation we have of a Celtic cross anywhere in the world. So from all the manuscripts, all the books, all the existing crosses in Ireland or Scotland or everywhere, this is the earliest. And this here is called St. Orin's Cross. It was not yet a Celtic cross, and that is the first cross, the oldest on Iona, which was erected where St. Orin's grave was located. The last few photographs from Iona I want to show you are from two places called Martyrs Bay and the White Strand of the Monks, which are two beaches on Iona where hundreds of monks in time were butchered during the Viking attacks. That's why in the icon the sea is red with their blood, and they have that menacing, Viking-looking ship approaching. From the heavens you have the blessing of Christ giving them the crowns of martyrdom. And this is the White Strand of the Monks. There's nothing to mark these places except our memory. If we forget about them, they are forgotten for us. And Martyrs Bay. I want to show you also this, which is something, it's one of the most important photographs for me. This is also taken from the same museum on Iona from where St. John's Cross was taken. This is a mass burial slab. When 20, 30 monks were killed, they did not have the time, the physical time, to carve as many crosses as were necessary. So they would simply grab these huge slabs. This is a very, very large stone, and just carve several crosses on them, simply to mark that more people were buried underneath. And as you can see, some are simple crosses, others are Celtic, but this is a mass burial. All right. After Iona, I want you to bear with me for a minute or two as I speak to you about St. Kenneth. St. Kenneth is one of those initial 12 monks who came to Iona with St. Columba. But very soon, in a few years after being on Iona, he wanted to live a life of more seclusion and more silence. In a strange way, he found Iona to be very busy and noisy for his taste. So he withdrew with St. Columba's blessing, and he lived as a hermit in this cave over here. And the island, so again, this is Mull, this is where St. Brandon, the monastery was. This is where Iona and St. Columba was. And this is where St. Kenneth's island is. So everything is pretty much around the Isle of Mull. And these are just photographs from Inch Kenneth, St. Kenneth's Island, taken from our pilgrimages. We go there by a sailing boat, and we have to stop there because the water is not high enough to land on the island. And from there, we take a smaller boat to the land. And on the island, you find the ruins of a Benedictine monastery, which was built on the foundation of an earlier Celtic monastery, where of course we go and we celebrate and we try our best to pray to the saints. And then if you go down from the ruined monastery towards the beach, you see the cave where St. Kenneth lived. And again, it is one of those places where we go and we do our best to pray. It's a lovely place to say prayers such as St. Patrick's breastplate, for instance. Any sort of prayer that connects you with the environment, with the nature around you, because everything just suddenly comes to life. You can see why they would pray for the blessing of the waters, or why they would pray for the blessings of the winds, and because they are so close to these elements of nature that they become either tools for their salvation or tools for their destruction. And it's again a different experience of prayer. Okay, I've put this here because it means we've moved to Mull. This is our island, and this is how we'll end the presentation. This is the Isle of Mull. This is a photograph taken from a village close to where we now have purchased a house. And I think it was taken by Debbie's son, Caleb. I think this was taken by Caleb as well. Oh no, I'll show you two caves. That's what I've done. I want to show you two caves. Have you noticed that on St. Brandon's Island we spoke about monks? On St. Columba's Island we spoke about monks. On Inch Kenneth, St. Kenneth's Island, again about monks. Well, on Mull there is a cave here which is known as the Nuns Cave. And it's for that reason that we decided to have this be a women's monastery, not a man's monastery, because we wanted to just honor the local feel, the local spirit or tradition of the place. And to get there, to the cave, you actually have to go to this deserted village and walk for about 2 hours through this scenery. Don't imagine that those nuns were any saner than the monks. It can only be done at very low tide, because if it's high tide, the path is covered by the water. So you have to get there at low tide, say your prayers, and then come back while it's still low tide. Otherwise, you end up there overnight, and you have to do all-night vigil in order to survive, really. And this is the entrance to the cave. This is the Nuns Cave. It's quite a large cave. I would say it's about the size of this room, which is huge by comparison to what St. Ninian or St. Kenneth, for instance, had. The nuns were there at the same time as St. Columba. So we again are talking about 6th century monasticism, but this time female monasticism. And they still have preserved some of the original crosses that were carved in the walls. There are a lot of crosses carved there, but only the very low and simple ones are from the first centuries. The other ones, the higher they get and the more complex they get, are of centuries more, closer to our time. And this is us again, singing actually the Troparion to the Celtic Saints at the entrance to the cave. And this is where kind of the whole thing is located. So you don't imagine it somewhere in the mountains protected against the winds or the storms or anything. It's just out there like everything else. And I'll show you briefly a second, I think I'll show you, shall I? Yes, I shall. A cave which is located here called Scholl Cave, which is extremely important historically. This can only be accessed by the beach because obviously you cannot come down those cliffs, and inside it you can still find the crosses from again 6th, 7th century. But see, because it's not taken such good care of, nobody on the island actually could show me the directions to get to it. I had to just dig out, thank God for the internet, in order to find the way there. These are the crosses, from all the centuries, but these ones are documented as being 6th, 7th centuries. And these things are pre-Christian. If you remember, there were those bulbs, round figures on St. John's cross. That's the Celtic symbol for eternity. It shows a snake swallowing its own tail. And that's what that stands for. So it's interesting to see Christian symbolism and pagan symbolism in the same cave. And at the very end, I want to show you a photograph or two from our church, Kilninian, which was built in 1755, and it is located on the foundation of, again, a 6th, 7th century monastery. Everything there started from a well, a holy well, dedicated to St. Ninian. And then because that well was there, these are just photographs from our repairing works. For 2 years almost, we've been covered in scaffolding, inside and outside. We've had to take down the entire roof, not only the tiles, but also the timber work underneath. We had to take it down because we discovered that nobody had done any sort of repairs in 1755. And even that timber was not new timber. They had used old timber, which they found on the beach. So it was basically shipwreck. So, we had to replace that with new timber and then find new tiles to recover the entire church. Do you see how the bell tower was taken down as well? And this is what it looks like now. Completely windproof, waterproof. The bell tower is there. The enemy has been defeated. That was what was used as a tool against us. But I'm very grateful to God that we have managed to get through that, and now we can celebrate inside. And at the end, I want to show you 2 photographs of the house which we bought for. This will actually be our pilgrimage house. So this is going to be your house in the years to come, once we finish building the monastery, because I still have to get through this endless, seemingly, process of just building next to Kilninian, so that the nuns and myself can live by Kilninian, and then this will be the house used for our pilgrimages. Until we manage to build there, we'll use this for the nuns. Look how close it is to the ocean. And I always say this and nobody believes me, but I give you my word. This here is a seal. You can go close and see it at the end if you don't believe me. We have a lot of neighbors, as you can see. We are very friendly. We are going to convert all of them. This building behind the church I think you could see it here better maybe. Yes. This shed and this greenhouse will change that, will turn that into a small chapel this May. There is a group of volunteers, again coming from the United States, mostly from Colorado Springs, and they will help me turn that shed into a chapel. So we can celebrate there, and once we move to Kilninian, the pilgrims and myself can celebrate there during our pilgrimages. And this is what we have. This is Kilninian with the vestry room. This is where the Holy Well of St. Ninian is located. This here is the cemetery, the ancient cemetery that belongs to the local council by law. And these are the 5 acres of land that by the grace of God we've managed to buy in September last year. So the last thing we need to do is build a house here so that the nuns and myself can move close to Kilninian. If you feel inclined and if you have the possibility to help, you can do so either by check, which have to be written to this US organization, but please, most importantly, go to the website, read about the saints, follow the Facebook page. I try my best to post there at least twice or 3 times a week, something, a photograph or some sort of information or something from the local tradition, and share them with anybody who may have a calling for a Western version of Orthodoxy. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for listening. Again, if you have questions of any kind, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Western version, do you celebrate the Byzantine liturgy?
Sorry.
Or
No. We celebrate exactly what we celebrate here.
oh,
The monastery belongs, or it does not belong, but the monastery is under the jurisdiction of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Romania. So we celebrate the same.
Can you leave that up on the screen? That
Oh,
last
forgive
one,
me.
the very last one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So and Romania celebrates in the same tradition as Greece or Russia or Serbia or all the Orthodox countries.
now all of these monks that went off to this diaspora and now into these islands, how do they physically maintain themselves? I mean, they gotta eat.
Yes, they ate.
I didn't see a big vegetable garden there.
No, there would be, actually on Iona, I don't want to include too many photographs because I don't want to take too much of your time, but on Iona there's an entire part of the island, actually the island, the part which is exposed to the ocean, called the Maher, which in Gaelic means the raised beach. There was a time when that piece of land was underwater, and then when the ocean withdrew, that was just left above, and it's extremely nutritious. And that's where they would grow grains and vegetables and their cattle and so on. And if you read the Life of St Columba, you will see that their lives were actually spent just crossing Iona from the eastern side where the church was to the western side where they would do their work. And there are beautiful stories that happen, and once you see the geography, they become so much more real. There's a story about St. Columba going very, very upset to see his monks on the western side while they were working. And he was terribly upset because he was told in a vision that he approached the end of his life. And then God changed his mind through the prayers, because of the prayers of the community. So he went to them on the field to scold them for keeping him alive when he was really looking forward to getting it done with and, entering the kingdom. There is a particular field which to this day is marked as the field of the angels, where St. Columba rested, and he had this vision of angels descending from heaven over Iona and then lifting back again. All these places it's one thing to read about them in a book, and it's another thing to walk there and to ask somebody, well, what does that mean in Gaelic? And suddenly it means, the field of the angels, and you know why. And very often they don't know why. There's the capital village on Mull, for instance, is called Tobermory. It is a lovely, lovely little village with very colorful homes and a nice feel about it. But Tobermory actually means Mary's well, because the ancient feast of the place was the Annunciation, which, as we know, took place as the Virgin was going to draw water from a well. And that's where the name comes from.
How many nuns do you have?
I don't have any. I don't own them. I did not go shopping for nuns. My bishop just announced me the day before I flew to see you again that there are 3 sisters who will join me. They are already in France, and they've lived in France for 2 years and a half. It's a very good system that he has. He has founded skeets and monasteries himself in Romania, and then he selects among the monastics there those whom he feels, they would do all right in a Western environment. And then he asks them to come to France, where we already have a few Orthodox monasteries. And they spend a few years there to get accustomed to life in the West, to learn a bit of a foreign language. And then when the new establishment is ready, they get sent to that particular... I'm very happy because all I know about them is that they all have a deep love of Father Sophrony Sakharov. And for me, that means more than anything. I don't, it's not about how old or young you are, how healthy or ill you are. It's about what you aim to become. Because if the aim is the same, if everybody here aimed in precisely the same direction towards the same point, sooner or later we will be in the same point. It doesn't matter that where we start from, we may be at a great distance from one another. If we all go in the same direction, we will eventually merge, and that's the greatest blessing. I pray for them, and I've been praying for them actually from the very beginning, that God sends the right people there. Because it's not going to be easy. You do imagine I've taken photographs, and I'm showing you photographs only from the summertime. I do not include photographs from November, December, January, February, March, and even April. So 4 years maybe, 4 years a month. It looks pretty much like an image of from a postcard. But the other months are rather harsh. And particularly for someone who has any sort of tendency towards depression, that can be a very harsh environment. So I really pray for them, and I ask of you to pray for them as well.
Can I make a quick
Yeah,
announcement?
please.
Let's go till 2:15, Father.
Go on. As you say, yeah.
Okay, I'm just letting you know.
Yeah.
Okay, just a quick announcement. Our scheduled time to end was 2. Let's see if we have just a couple more questions. We'll go until 2:15, and then we'll tidy up around here. One thing that we can do together to help the cleanup process, if you're able, is to just fold up the chairs and lay them on the table lengthwise, right at 2:15 when we're ready to wrap it up. This isn't specifically a fundraising visit. Father came to be with us and to share with us. We're not doing a specific collection.
Yeah.
The church will be. We're gonna. We want to support you as
Thank you.
a parish for
Thank
your
you.
generosity.
Thank you.
For coming here. But I also just want to encourage everyone to please support his work. You see, I had him. He was being obedient. I told him to put this back on the screen so that you guys can take your phone and do a little picture of it or write it down and go and visit. Father's also quite accessible. So for those of you who are internet savvy, and I think it's a matter of course these days for most of us, I highly recommend visiting the website and his pretty active Facebook page. So
Yeah.
if there are just a few more questions, we have about 10 more minutes, and then we'll start tidying up around here. Okay, and again, thank you all. It was wonderful to be with you and have you here. Thank you, Father.
Thank you. Is there another question, or are we free? Yeah.
Does the monastery itself have ties with the monastery in Essex?
No, I wish it did actually. I mean, it has ties in the sense that even without us wanting it. Myself and these sisters, as it seems, are shaped by Father Sophrony. In that sense, yes. But no, I would have actually very much liked, and I did discuss this with my bishop, I would have very much liked the first nuns to have come from Essex. But because they belong to they are under the ecumenical jurisdiction, and the monastery in Scotland is under the Romanian jurisdiction, that would just prove to be too difficult to kind of work out. So, but it's healthy, I think. It's healthy that we have the same saint. Although he's not been yet canonized, Father Sophrony, he's clearly a saint, and it's healthy that there really are two monasteries in the United Kingdom. There's the monastery in Essex in England, and there's the monastery on Mull. And it is an immense gift, and it shows what a great saint he is, that both monasteries are shaped into the same sort of theology and spirit. It's one of those rare gifts from God that I found out about 3 years ago from two different people, both of them from the community in Essex, that when Father Sophrony came to England from France, he actually wanted to establish his monastery in the Hebrides. And he was asked by his bishop to come much closer to London in order to serve to the local Greek or Russian communities. But his heart was here. And then, you know, if it didn't work then, God keeps pushing. Yeah.
I'm kind of new to Orthodox and the Catechism right now. And I'm trying to wrap my mind around the idea of a saint. It's not just inspiring you, but somehow communicating with you or giving you this vision. So just help me understand how that happens with you.
So I don't yet hear voices. When I hear voices, I'll let my father, my spiritual father, know, and then I may visit a doctor, depending on his advice, because sometimes voices are good. I don't want you to wrap your head against it, because that wouldn't help you at all. I want you to just trust 2,000 years of experience and try it out. Just pray. Just pray to whatever saint speaks to you. And if you are an intellectual man, find a saint who wrote something that speaks to you. Find someone like St. Isaac the Syrian, or someone like St. Basil the Great, or any of the theologian saints. And then you'll just see what it's like when they speak to you. And that experience will be much stronger than anything I can come up with, or anything you can read, actually. Saints are present in the most physical way in our lives. I have had cases when I was for instance, I was in Bari, and where the relics of Saint Nicholas are now buried. And Saint Nicholas is the saint I love most, because he loves me a great deal. I'm very selfish. I love the saints who love me, and I had entered the church where his relics are, the cathedral where his relics are, in the morning, and then it was already 3-4 p.m. I don't even know when time passed by, and I was so hungry, and I did not want to leave the church, so I just asked Saint Nicholas for food. And in less than a few minutes, 3-4 minutes, a woman from my parish in Bucharest, mind you, I was studying in England, and I took a flight to the south of Italy to be with St. Nicholas. And a woman from my parish in Bucharest was there at that precise time. She recognized me and was so happy to see me there. And she said, I've just commemorated the death of my, I can't remember, father, grandfather, something. And she gave me something to eat, which you always do to celebrate for the departed. That moment. I remember also with St. Nicholas, I was in the same place in Bari, and this group of pilgrims came, and I thought, I was really considering going on a pilgrimage to St. Seraphim of Sakharov. And I didn't quite know whether I should do it or not, because it's such a hassle to arrange a pilgrimage into Russia, from the visa to the transport to everything. So this group of pilgrims came in, and then they just knelt down, and they just, did what all pilgrims did. And then they were getting out, and I said, I should just go and ask them where they are from. And if St. Nicholas wants me to go to St. Seraphim, they are going to be from Russia. And then I thought, what am I doing here? I'm tempting God. This is not, a Christian doesn't do that. But that only took me for about 30 seconds of righteousness, and then I just ran after them. Father, Father, I mean, I was like you. I was 18, 19-year-old. I mean, before I became a monk. And I asked him, where are you from? And they were not from Russia. They were from Divevo, which is the small village in Russia where the monastery built by Saint Seraphim is located, and the relics of Saint Seraphim are to this day. So they are not from this larger than a continent country. They were from the precise parish of the village where that saint is from. I've had Saint Nicholas step in when I was afraid of stray dogs in Bucharest as well, in the night. I used to confess to my spiritual father in Bucharest, and my monastery was in Moldavia. So the only way to get to my spiritual father was to take a bus for about 8 hours, plus 2 hours of just getting to the bus, and then go home. I would get into Bucharest by 2-3 a.m. I would go home where my parents are and sleep for 3-4 hours, then rush to church, see my spiritual father, confess, and then go back and take the bus back home. I've done this for years while I was in Moldavia. But the part I was panicked about was getting into Bucharest at 2 or 3 a.m. Until very recently, a few years ago, Bucharest had this horrible problem of stray dogs. There were tens of thousands of stray dogs in Bucharest, and I don't know if they just get together in packs and they attack. Actually, there have been people killed in Bucharest, and I'm absolutely afraid of them. And they feel that you're afraid, so that's when they attack. And I remember just walking 2-3 a.m. just praying, no dogs, no dogs, no dogs. It's like my mantra. Instead of Lord Jesus Christ, like, no dogs, no dogs. And I just entered this small street, at the end of which is my parents' house, I mean the block of flats where we live. We don't have a house. And I was midway on this narrow street, and then I saw them come. Just the whole pack of them. I saw them come. And I did not think Christ, I did not think Mother of God. I instantly say, Saint Nicholas, do something. I have no idea what to do. And this old man came, just following the dogs. Complete darkness, just this figure of an old man. And he knelt down, I mean kind of the level I'm at right now, which is exactly what you don't do with stray dogs. You don't get down because they attack you. All these dogs went towards him, and he just kind of played with them. I can't even claim that I paid attention. I was so afraid. I didn't care if they were eating him alive. All I wanted was to get out of there alive. So I just passed by as those dogs and whatever that figure were doing in the middle, the very middle of the street. And when I got to the entry into my parents' block of flats, I looked back and I could only see the dogs. I mean, I could give you books to read about the theology of the saints, but none of that meant nothing to me, nothing, until I needed help, and then they are there in the most physical, visible way. And that's just Saint Nicholas. I mean, there are other wonderful saints. Are we done? Okay. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me. You do realize that in 2014, when I came here the first time, we only had a collapsing church and myself. And now we have repaired the church together, we have bought the land together, we have a house where we can start a monastic life. There are 3 nuns. We have actually founded a monastery. So thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my silly heart. Thank you.